Hey, it's the preacher, and I think it's time for another episode of Cool Old Stuff. Remember, as I've done this series, we began with the survival kit out of an airplane from the late 60s that belonged to a World War II pilot, that it was in his personal plane that he flew across Africa and most of the North America with. That was cool old stuff. The criteria here is that it needs to be old, and old is relative. It doesn't have to be 100 years old. We could be looking at Civil War bullets that are that old, or in this instance we're going to be looking at some things that are probably 80 years old, 70 years old, but they're cool. It's my collection of L&S Lures, L&S Bait Company lures. Let me tell you a little bit about L&S Lures, or L&S Bait Company Miro Lures. They began by a man named Harold LeMaster and his partner Phil Schreiner. These two guys lived in Bradley, Illinois. Well, Harold LeMaster was friends with a fella, a fishing buddy, by the name of Walter Hines. Walter Hines and he would fish for bass, walleye, pike. They would go on fishing trips together. And Walter's favorite thing to do was to carve lures and catch fish with them. You know, it was his own design, it was his own handiwork. And he began to develop a carved lure with a metal bill on it that was jointed, and it would sink and swim like a minnow in the water. It just became a success. I mean, he was catching fish all the time. And so what ended up happening was the more industrious Harold LeMaster said, why don't you sell me the patent on your hand-carved fishing lures and let me start making them. So in 1937, LeMaster and Schreiner opened up the L&S Bait Company in Bradley, Illinois. And what they made were these lures that were on the pattern that they got from Harold's fishing buddy Walter. Well, they were a success. They were originally made out of wood. They had glass eyes that were made in a nearby doll factory that they would use for the eyes on their lures. And people were buying them and they worked great. But World War II hit, metal and things like that all went to the war effort. They closed down. After the war, they reopened. And when they reopened with some plastic molds and began to make plastic lures in the mid to late 40s. By 1950, LeMaster had decided to open a second factory in Clearwater, Florida. Now, he moved it to Clearwater, Florida, obviously because there's more fishing on the coast, and that gave him an opportunity to sell coastal lures. And they developed what they called their Miro finish, or Mira finish, kind of a clear glass look with reflective foil underneath it. And so by 1972, they had closed the Bradley, Illinois plant, and all L&S lures were made in Clearwater, Florida. Now that's the history behind it. That's the boring stuff to most of you. I like history. Here's what makes it cool. When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, my dad worked for Pepsi Cola. He retired from there. But he was working for Pepsi Cola, and he came home from work one day and he said, I got you something. I was like, okay, cool, what is it? It was a little cardboard box. It looked like brand new. And inside it was this lure. This lure here. And this lure looked like brand new. And he said, now that's an antique fishing lure. That's from the 1940s. And you need to keep it. It's something that you need to hang on to. So I did. I kept it in my room and I didn't use it. But somehow I would get it out and show it to my friends. Look, this was an antique lure. And I don't know where the box went. It may still be at my mom and dad's. I don't know. But this is an early L&S sinker. This is called the Pike Master. This was the larger of their lures. The Pike Master, this one here does have glass eyes. It is an early model. It does have a waxy coating, but I believe it to be plastic because somehow I've chipped a little paint off the back. So this is my first introduction to an antique lure, and I could tell by when I was getting lures, they were in the plastic pack, you know, where you tore them open, or even crankbaits might be in a cardboard box, but they still had cellophane covers. This was in like a shoebox style, and it said L&S Bait Company on the front, Pike Master. I don't know what happened to that box. It may be in my mom and dad's attic. I wish I could find it. So I had this lure here, and I was really, really proud of it. I've never fished with it. I've always just looked at it. So I'm down at my grandpa's about, I don't know, 3 or 4 years later. I'm probably 14 or 15, and he had an old shed, and in his shed was all kinds of old stuff. Old Army rations. He worked at a military base, and he would get the old K rations and C rations, the little green metal cans or olive drab metal cans, and we'd go in there and dig around and find cheese spread and peanut butter and dates and crackers, and so anyways, I'm in there digging around, because if we found it, he'd let us eat it. And I found an old tackle box. And I opened up the old tackle box. It was probably one of my dad's or my uncle's old tackle boxes, and it basically had a bunch of just hooks and weights and junk. And it had one lure in it, and I instantly recognized it. It was the L&S Sinker. This is an L&S Sinker Pike Master. This is the L&S Sinker. I don't want to lie to you, it's on the back side. L&S Sinker, Miro Lure, patent pending. This is a newer version and a smaller version of the one my dad gave me. And so I'm like, Papaw, this is an antique lure. Well, it's not really antique. It's probably from the, I don't know, 60s or 70s. And I'm like, this is an antique lure. And he's like, well, do you want it? And I said, well, sure I want it, Papaw. So Papaw gave me this one. It also looks virtually unused. I don't know as though anybody ever fished with it, or if they did, it dried right back out. So from the time of my childhood, I owned those two lures, and I was always proud of them. Well, my wife and I are walking around at an antique store, and we don't buy a lot of antiques, but we just like to go in there and look at cool old stuff. And so I always go over and look at the vintage fishing lures or antique fishing lures, and most of what I see in most antique booths are basically just stuff from the 60s and 70s. It's not really valuable. And the people that deal in antiques really don't know what fishing lures to go for. Anyways, there's just a bunch of overpriced river runts and Lucky 13s. And I've got some old vintage lures, you know, but I never bought them. I just pick them up in a tackle box, you know, at a yard sale or something. So I see hanging there among all the others, I instantly spot it. It's this L&S Sinker. And so I'm looking at it. Yes, it's an older one. It doesn't say Miro Lures on it. And so I'm like, this is before they started using the Miro Lure name. So this is probably from the 50s or 60s. And anyways, I'm like, I think it's the same size, but it's a different color. So I want to say I gave $2.50 or $3 for this little orange and red one. So we're walking around probably 10 years later, and I look, and it's the smallest L&S Sinker I've ever seen. But I can spot them because of their trademark metal bill. This was what Walter Hines said made the lure, was the angle of this metal that is actually screwed in, and it causes it to wobble. And then he jointed these, so you got this swimming action, and that's what made them so popular. So anyways, I'm looking at this one. It's the tiniest one I've ever seen. It says L&S. This is the spin model, which they had the Pike Master that was large. They had the Bassmaster that was next, and then they had these smaller ones that I think were called Panfish, Pan Masters maybe. And then this is the spin, and the spin it is even smaller. So anyways, this one looks relatively new. It doesn't see much use. It's got a very good finish. I'll bring you in and show you up close in a minute. But so I found this, and they wanted like $3 for it. And I'm like, well, I've already got 3. That would be awesome. I'd have another size and a different color. So I bought it. And so now, every time I go in an antique mall, if I see fishing lures, I'll walk over there and I'll look for an L&S Sinker. I never find them. I never find them. I mean, in all the years, I've bought 2. About a month ago, we went in a local antique mall here not too far from us. We were just killing some time. We had to wait till I think we had to pick something up. Anyways, so I said, let's go in this antique mall. We'll just walk around. That'll give us something to do. So we'll walk in there, and back in the back's a guy got a bunch of lures. And lo and behold, the smallest L&S sinker ever made is hanging there, just like this. This is the Spin It. Now this one is a little rough. The foil on the inside is dented. It has a little, I wouldn't call it surface rust. I think it's really just water staining on the bill. But it's tiny. And so I bought it. I said, I'm getting that. I think I gave $1.50 for it. Next to it was an L&S Bassmaster. This is the size in between the one my dad gave me and the one my grandpa gave me, but it is in rough shape. It had originally had some kind of glitter finish, and I think it's one of the older ones just by looking at the patent pending on the bottom. But it's got some rust on the hooks and they're a little bent, but it is a representative of the size. So here's my collection of L&S sinkers, the only lures I really collect, the only ones I ever look for, and they may be really common in your area, but they're not in Arkansas. So my dad gives me one in a box when I'm a little kid and I lose the box. My grandpa gives me one out of an old tackle box. I've still got it. I pick up two in over a course of about probably, well, Missy and I have been married for almost 25 years. So I pick up two over the course of 25 years, and then I find two more right near the house. And these are not a real expensive lure. Now the big Pike Master, in good shape like this one's in, these will bring $30. Okay? If you have the box, they can bring closer to $100 if the box is in good shape. It's not about the money though. The smaller panfish models, they bring $5 to $10 in good clean shape, and along with the little ones. So we're not talking about something expensive. We're talking about something that my dad gave me. It's something that I've kind of picked up over the years, and now if I ever find an L&S sinker lure, I try to grab it, but I just don't see very many of them. So I'm going to bring you in close and I'll show you them up close and you can kind of get an idea of what they look like. Okay, let's get in here close. I've got a little pointer. This is cool, but it's not old. Some of you may have seen an Arkansas toothpick. This is a Canadian toothpick. It came out of a black bear. Alright, what I got here is the Pike Master. This is the one my dad gave me. You kind of see the size of it in relation to the others. This is the one I got out of my, probably one of my uncle's or my grandpa's old tackle box. These two are the same size. This one was given to me by my grandpa. This one was the first one that I purchased in a antique store. Like I said, these four here were all purchased, and I bet combined I did not give $20 for them. $12 or $15 probably for the four of them combined. But you see the earlier version where, if I pick it up and show you, you can kind of see the it doesn't have that mirror finish, and then you have a couple of, I don't know how those got scratched. I've never used it, I guess shuffling around the paint chips, but you see kind of the older style. They still made that, but this is an older one based on the markings on the lip. And same with this one here, not the real mirror finish like you see on the others. It is a mirror lure. Let me see if I can get you up here and get you focused on this. Mirror lure, sinker, patent pending. This one here, the original, the Pike Master, there you see Pike Master, sinker, L&S. What gets me about these lures is look at the swivel. That is stamped out of aluminum or something, and then if you notice how they're attached, the bill is screwed in with a flathead screw, and then the eye of the hook also holds in the plate. See I mean, just craftsmanship. So anyways, those two were given to me. Here's a couple that I purchased. That is not going to be showing up well. This one is really hard to read. It says Mira Lure Company. And there again, the same model, the ODM. Same as this one here that Papaw gave me. Here's probably one of the prettiest, and I think one of the best. I mean, can you see the mirror? You can see kind of the foil scales under the glass, and when you look at it from the top, you get the eyes that pop out. L&S Spin Mirror Lure USA. And then I didn't clean any of these lures. I mean, that's the way they came. I found that one in Papaw's box. They all look just like they did. Now these two here I'm probably going to clean. Here's the little tiny one. Of course, it's not jointed. You can see the dent in its foil. It might have been a second or something. It's a little dingy, but clearly marked L&S USA. And I think it's neat. And then of course this one here is really, really rough shape, but it gives you an idea of size. And it could be an older one. I believe it is. I haven't really looked up any of the stuff on it because it's in such rough shape. And most of the time with old lures, condition is, unless it's just extremely rare, condition is what decides their value. And so thank you guys for watching today and looking at some of the stuff. It's not valuable. Everything on that table wouldn't scratch $100, even if you got premium price for all of it. But to me, it's cool. There's a story behind it. My dad got me started in it. My grandpa contributed. And I love these old lures. I mean, I kind of think sometimes about taking out my old vintage, my old Herd Speedcaster reel, which I did a cool old stuff episode on, and stringing it up and putting one of these old L&S sinkers on there and just catching a fish on. I think that'd be great, but I would also be afraid that it would scuff it up. I may have to use that real ugly one there. Anyways, thank you guys for watching and letting me share some stuff that is cool to me, and I hope you enjoy it. And we'll do this again whenever I decide what other cool old stuff to show you. So, see you next time. Man, I got a noisy chair and it seems to be on. There we go. Maybe that'll work. Excuse me.